Okay, we should have audio now. I apologize for that delay. I've been dealing with my computer was just kind of bugging out on me. I can't explain it. It was behaving very strangely for a moment there. I was thinking I was going to have to shut it down and restart it for a second, but looks like we're up and running now. Again, I apologize for that delay. So I hope everyone is having a good week here. It's supposed to get really nasty out. Supposedly, it's supposed to get really nasty out here very soon. And I think there's some schools in the school district that have closed from what I understand, but from what I gather, Pensacola State, as of now, campus is going to be open tomorrow, although we don't have classes on Fridays typically anyway. I think there might be some limited programs that have Friday classes, but not to my immediate knowledge. Okay, so according to my notes here, which here they are, looking at where we left off last time, just give me a moment to regather that here. We got into chapter 1, and I think we made it as far as discussing the yes, I agree. Canvas and Zoom have been acting rather strangely. I agree. But as I was saying, I believe we left off somewhere around discussing the nature versus nurture debate. I know we watched a TED Talk by Steven Pinker on the nature versus nurture debate. And apparently I forgot to jot down where we left off, but if my memory serves, we had been discussing the ideas of Sigmund Freud. Does that sound correct to you guys? Were we talking about Freud? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's what my memory is telling me as well. So cool. I don't have dementia just yet. We'll be talking about dementia at some point. My great-grandmother died of Alzheimer's disease, and it tends to run in families, and people are living longer. So who knows? Actually, not that uncommon these days. But we were talking about the ideas of Sigmund Freud last time. So let me go ahead and get those slides on screen for you guys, so we can rock and roll here and continue to discuss psychodynamic theory. Actually, one thing that might be useful is to go ahead and pull up an image of Freud's psychosexual stages, because I would like to recap that.
I was gonna say, they actually just put me in your class like sometime last week when the first week was already over. So I was gonna be like, I don't know where he's leaving off.
So you should be able to go in and watch the recording. This is it's like my 5th lecture of the day, so I get really hoarse at this point, right? So I'm just chugging water at this point all night. But yeah, you should be able to go in, and also I think someone might have left their mic turned on. I'm not sure, but you should be able to go in here into Canvas and watch a recording of prior class meetings. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so you guys should have a view of my second screen here. If you go into Zoom, you should be able to view cloud recordings. And I believe I published last week's meeting. If I haven't, I'll go ahead and do it. Yes, it is published. It was already published. So if you go in there, you should be able to view the lecture that I gave last week. Would that help?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So we were talking about Freud's ideas, and Freud was known for this idea of the subconscious mind, the idea that that most of what drives us, most of what dictates our behavior and our thoughts and feelings at any given point is driven by factors which exist below our awareness. And I've got my screens all messed up here, so like my display is over here, but the camera's over here, so it's kind of screwed up. I apologize, guys, but I need to get these screens like switched around, so I'm gonna mess with the settings. But anyway, Freud believed in this idea that our behavior is primarily dictated by subconscious motives, right? That most of our thoughts and feelings and what we experience from day to day is driven by subconscious urges and desires that were laid there during childhood. And he believed that sexuality played a significant role. It's what he called the libido, right? It's a Freudian term. If you've ever heard the term libido, that's straight out of Freud. But he believed that that much of what drives us is of a sexual or libidinous nature, and he believed that that we had this ability to repress memories, things that we don't want to face. Right? Not everything's all sexual to Freud, but a lot of it is, right? And Freud also had this idea that people don't want to face what's really bothering them, whatever it is, right? So they shove it into their subconscious, and they utilize what Freud referred to as defense mechanisms to keep these things that we don't want to face at bay, right? So, for example, one classical Freudian defense mechanism is denial, right? And that's a really popular term that you hear about in the addiction treatment world, right? And one of the, it's kind of a classic cliche, but there's a lot of truth to it. One of the first things that addicts go through, in the process of recovering, if they do recover, a lot unfortunately don't, but is you go through a process of denial, right? Where initially you don't want to believe that you really have a problem, right? And I see someone's commenting in. Freud really started writing his books, I would say. His ideas started becoming popular in the 1890s, I would say, yeah. This was really when he started to take off. He passed away in, I believe it was 1939 or 1940, somewhere. It was during World War II that he passed away. But Freud had a lot of ideas that we kind of take for granted now, right? Ideas like denial, right? Which you see a lot of denial among addicts. Another one is projection, right? So projection is a classic defense mechanism when we project our own feelings and emotions onto other people, right? So let's say, for example, someone's cheating on their spouse, right? They're being unfaithful, right? And they accuse their spouse of cheating when it's actually, they're the one that's cheating, right? That's projection. Or maybe reaction formation. Reaction formation is when you do the exact opposite of what it is you really want to do, to hide your true motives from yourself, right? So for example, I have this friend who he's gay, but for many years he was what is commonly referred to as closeted, right? And he was really afraid of people. He was afraid to come out as gay for many years, and finally did. I'm happy for him that he did. But for many years he was in the closet, and it was primarily driven by this desire for his parents, who were really religious, not to find out. But in any case, when he was still in the closet, he would really play up being manly, right? To like this over the top kind of masculinity, right? Like he would work out excessively, and just wear nothing but wife beaters or tank tops, just to show off his muscles. And he drove this big huge truck, and just really tried to act super masculine, right? Whatever that word means, but he tried to act super masculine, and to just kind of deflect, to try to, I guess he was really trying to convince himself, right? But he was hiding from the fact that he was, and by the way, there are actually plenty of very masculine gay men. I don't mean to imply that all gay men are feminine. I don't mean to imply that at all. In fact, there are plenty of gay men that I know that I would not pick a fight with. But what I'm saying is that in his case, he was he was using that over-the-top masculinity to hide from his own sexuality, right? And that's a Freudian defense mechanism called reaction formation. But Freud said that we pass through these stages, right? These psychosexual stages of development. Just kind of reiterating this because I don't exactly, I didn't go back and replay it exactly all I covered last time. So I want to make sure I've covered all of Freud's ideas before I move on. Yeah, no, I agree, Tiffany. I agree completely, and I was very happy for my friend when he finally did find the courage to be himself. And I wish more people would feel comfortable with themselves. In any case, Freud believed that we pass through certain stages of psychological development, which he referred to as psychosexual stages, which you can see here on my screen. Maybe I can blow them up a little bit. A little bit of computers. Maybe this is not the best one to use. Anyway, we'll just have to make do with this. But Freud said we pass through the oral stage, the anal stage, the phallic stage, the latency stage, and the genital stage. And it does take some time to break those stages down and talk about them. So do you guys recall me already telling you about them? I don't want to re-lecture on that if I've already talked about that. I should have gone back and reviewed the recording, so I knew this for myself, but I just got kind of behind here before class. But do you guys remember me talking about the psychosexual stages? If someone wants to let me know in the chat box if this is ringing a bell for anyone, because it's going to take a few minutes to go over them. I did talk about them. Okay, cool. So just be familiar with those. Since I did talk about them, I think they're also shown in a table in your textbook somewhere. You definitely want to be familiar with those. So then we can go ahead and move on then to the next theorist who I want to focus on for a little bit, and that would be Erik Erikson. Okay, so you guys should have a full screen view of my slides here. I'm not sure which one of my screens you're seeing, if you're seeing my screen 1 or screen 2, but you should see the slides either way. So Erik Erikson was a student of Freud's, actually. Freud had a lot of students who would go on to later become well-known theorists themselves. Not just Erik Erikson, but also Carl Jung, Alfred Adler, Karen Horney, his daughter Anna Freud, just to name a few folks off the top of my head. All of those are folks who went on to become famous psychologists themselves and came up with their own theories, which kind of belong to what we call the psychodynamic family of theories, right? So the family of theories that is associated with Freud and his followers, they're called the psychodynamic theories. And of course, the most well-known of them is Freud's psychosexual theory of development. But each of the psychodynamic theorists, who basically they were all Freud students to begin with before they went on to do their own thing, they were all still influenced by Freud, even though they kind of went on and formed their own ideas. They still had a foundation that was rooted in Freud's ideas, but Freud would have falling outs with these people because you know they would challenge his thinking sometimes, right? Freud didn't like that. You know, he had, you know, a huge ego, to use one of his own terms. But in any case, Erik Erikson, probably in terms of developmental psychology, is the most important of Freud's famous students, because his other students were more in the psychotherapy world. But it was Erikson who really had a significant amount to say about child development. And what's kind of cool about Erikson is that he didn't focus so much on sex exclusively like Freud did. I mean, don't get me wrong, he acknowledged that sexuality is an important part of our identity, you know, just like we all probably would. But we would also probably all acknowledge that, you know, there's more to us than just our libidos and, you know, the way we behave in bed, right? You know, there's more to us as human beings than that, right? So Freud, you know, had this sort of narrow view of people, and Freud also believed that that development kind of stopped once you completed puberty, right? That once you completed, you know, puberty and you became able to sexually reproduce, you were in the genital stage, and that was it. You know, that's the crowning achievement of development there to Freud. But the idea that you would be the same person at age 20 that you are at age 40 even, or even age 60, you know, that's crazy, right? I mean, we continue to grow and change throughout our lives. We all know this. You know, it's a cliche, but you know, if I were to meet 20-year-old me, you know, I'll be turning 38 here in June. But if I were to meet 20-year-old me, I'd probably want to kick his ass, right? Like, I probably wouldn't like that guy, you know. But in a lot of ways, I'm still the same guy, right? I am still Richard Carr, but I'm also, you know, a different Richard Carr than I was when I was 20, right? And my values have become more mature in my skills, and I think I've definitely become more responsible and less impulsive. And you know, by evidence by the fact that I haven't gotten a speeding ticket in years, right? Except for that ticket that I got. Well, that was running the light, so that's technically not a speeding ticket. But in any case, you know, I'd love to. I do honestly believe that I've become a better person with age, and I hope that you guys feel that way too as you guys grow and mature. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we continue to grow and change throughout the lifespan. And it was Erik Erikson who was really the first major theorist to acknowledge that development is something that continues to occur throughout the lifespan. And it's not something that just stops once we complete puberty or adulthood, right? We're constantly growing and changing. And Erikson also, again, wasn't so quick to pin everything on sexuality, right? In fact, while Freud's stages were called psychosexual stages, Erikson's stages are referred to as the psychosocial stages of development, right? Known as Erikson's psychosocial stages or Erikson's psychosocial theory. So Erikson believed that our social relationships actually play a significant role in shaping our sense of identity, right, and our sense of self. which is what his theory is all about, is how the sense of self, how the ego develops throughout the lifespan. So Erickson said that we progress through a series of stages. I thought I had them in my slides. Yep, here they are. They're just misplaced. I'll have to go back to those last couple of slides because these slides are out of place. But Erickson said that we pass through 8 stages of development at different stages of the lifespan. And that each stage is characterized by a crisis of some kind, where you're faced with 2 basic possible outcomes, right? In the very first stage, called the trust versus mistrust stage, it's all about the child learning to trust the world, to trust the caregivers or not, right? So if the child is in an environment where they're fed on demand, comforted when they're upset, and reliably cared for, then in this theory, that child's going to learn that the world's a safe place and that people can be trusted, right? Now, on the other hand, if that's not the situation, if there's neglect or abuse even, or just, maybe parents that just, for whatever reason, aren't as warm or as loving and as responsive, then the child might might get the message that, people can't really be counted on, you can't really trust people. The world's a scary place, you never know when your next meal is going to come, right? So you come out of this into toddlerhood with either a sense of basic trust in the world or a sense of basic mistrust. And then you move into the toddlerhood years, which he referred to as autonomy versus shame and doubt. And this is all about, learning that you are a separate agent from other people, learning that you are a causal agent in the world. If I do things, I make things happen, right? I'm a moral agent. I'm a source of agency. I'm a person, right? You're learning that you're a separate self from everybody else and that you're an agent of causality. And by an agent of causality, what I mean by that is you're someone who can make something happen. Right? Have you ever noticed toddlers, they like to poke at things, knock things off tables? It's not because they want your kitchen to be a mess, I promise. It's because, well, they're learning about how the world works and they're learning about cause and effect, right? And they're learning about, oh, hey, when I do something, this happens, cause, effect, action, consequence, right? So the crisis of this stage is that the child will either end up with a sense of, independence, and yeah, I got this, right? I can make things happen. Or maybe not so much, maybe self-doubt, right? Maybe a lack of confidence. Moving into the early childhood years, this is the stage of what Erickson referred to as initiative versus guilt. So at this stage, the child, it's just kind of sort of an extension of autonomy versus shame and doubt, but it's more about gaining further independence and learning to take initiative, meaning that, you can come up with your own ideas and you don't just have to do other people's ideas, right? You can make things happen, but not only that, you can take an initiative and you can go out and try things and take risks and you can make things happen. But if that's not encouraged, Perhaps you come from a home where there's a toxic relationship with the mother, right? This is sort of a classic Jungian archetype, Carl Jung, another one of Freud's students. But has anybody ever heard of the archetype of the devouring mother? Right? And the male equivalent would be the tyrannical father, right? Like the tyrannical king. But the devouring mother is basically, it's a Jungian archetype, but it's basically a mother that doesn't want to see her children grow up, right? She wants them to stay children forever, right? And you keep them from growing up by basically sheltering them to death, right? So you devour them with your love. You keep them from growing by over sheltering them. But it's a Jungian archetype, right? But an outcome of guilt is the sort of thing that you would see in this sort of parenting situation. Like if you have a parent who, for whatever pathological reason, causes the child to feel guilty every time they want to go out and gain some independence, right? You don't want to spend time with your own mother, right? That the guilt trippiness, right? Anybody here have a guilt tripping mother, right? Right?
Not a mom, but an aunt.
A guilt tripping aunt, right? And I guess, I don't know why it always has to be female family members. I guess, fathers could guilt trip people too, but I guess the stereotype is it's always the women for some reason, right? But yeah, this is like it's the guilt trippy sort of mentality in a parent at a young age, right? It's the sort of parent that doesn't want their child to take risks and spread their wings. It's the kind of parent that is terrified to let their child fall and get a bruise, right? You're going to kill them with safety, right? Smothering them to death. It's the devouring mother, right? So you end up with a situation of guilt. Can anybody relate to that? Did anybody have a parent who was like that? And if you're interested in these Jungian archetypes, again, look into the work of the famous psychologist Carl Jung, who was also a student of Freud's, but we don't really talk about Jung much in this class.
My family is actually going to family therapy soon because of similar situation. So.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, no need to share more than you're comfortable with, but yeah, I'm glad that you guys are at least seeking some professional input. I hope you're going to someone who's competent, who is able to help. So yeah. So in the next stage, industry versus inferiority, this is the tween years. This is late childhood, right? This is middle to late childhood leading up to the beginning of puberty, right? But this is the stage at which the child is really starting to develop their sense of self-esteem, right? And gaining a sense of mastery, right? And think back to your childhood, right? I know for me at least, and I know for probably most people, it was during this period, late to middle childhood, where you really started to discover what you were good at and what you weren't good at, right? So for example, for me, during this time period, I discovered that I was a musician. It was during this time that I picked up a musical instrument for the first time, which was the guitar. And then later I, had some piano lessons and then string bass, right? So it was during that time that I started learning to play music. And, I'm a lifelong musician, if you haven't noticed, right behind me. I'm sitting here in my studio. It was also during that time, when I discovered that I like to play football. I played football when I was a kid. I was defensive lineman, right? And I discovered that I loved football. Although I didn't much play in high school because of an injury, but I discovered sports, right? Tiffany discovered that she could write. And one day, I will give you guys a little demo, but hey, if you want to watch something, don't do it now during class, but on my YouTube station, I've got a little video of me jamming out with a buddy, but in here in my studio. But yeah, maybe one of these days I'll riff for you guys when we have some time to do it, and I want to make sure that it won't cause us to be behind. But yeah, at some point I probably will. My acoustic guitar doesn't have any strings on it right now anyway, and but I did just buy a new pedal for my electric guitar. I got a new reverb pedal. I'm obsessed with reverb. Yeah, I'll send the link. You guys remind me at the end of class, and I'll send the link. It's nothing too impressive, just riffing with scales, but just improvising rather. But in any case, the stage of, it's not a difficult instrument. You know, guitar is it's not just electric guitar. If you can play guitar, you can play any guitar. So guitar is guitar, whether it's electric or acoustic or whatever, guitar is guitar. But anyway, you're going to get me going on music here. But in any case, you guys are trying to get me here. So the stage of industry versus inferiority is the stage of middle to late childhood in which you're learning your skills, right? You're learning what you're good at, you're learning what you're not good at. You're also finding what cliques you fit in with at school, right? Now, if you're homeschooled, you might have a different experience, but it's usually around this time when you're kind of figuring out your crowd, right? You know, like for me, I hung out with two crowds, basically, athletes and band geeks, right? Those were my crowds, basically. But in any case, the idea is that you're figuring out who you are, kind of. It's the early stages of you figuring out who you are, right? And you're gaining a self-concept and a self-image and a sense of self-esteem, or well, hopefully you have some self-esteem, right? A lot of young folks struggle with that, and you know, especially during adolescence, right? There's this Netflix series called 13 Reasons Why, which is it's an emotionally brutal series about this young woman that decides to take her own life, and you know, there's a lot of triggering stuff in that show, but it's a great show that just illustrates the emotional swings of adolescence, right? But you're starting to see the beginnings of you're starting to see the beginnings of all of that, right, at this point. And now when puberty hits at adolescence, you know, you're getting into really finding out who you are, right? Because now you're at, you know, you're getting towards the end of middle school, beginning of high school age, puberty's in full swing. You've discovered, you know, that you're a sexual being, if you haven't already, right? You definitely have by this point, unless you're asexual. There are folks who are asexual. But you're discovering that, you know, you're a sexual being. You're discovering, you know, you're experimenting with relationships. Most people become sexually active for the first time during adolescence. So it's during adolescence that we're really figuring out who we are, right? You know, who am I and what's my place in this world? What kind of person am I? And Erikson referred to this as identity versus role confusion, right? So Erikson said by the end of adolescence, you should have a pretty good idea of who you are as a person. And if you don't, though, you'll start adulthood confused about who you are. Now, I think these days it takes people a little bit longer to figure out who they are, honestly. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the chapter on emerging adulthood. But I know I didn't know who I was when I was 18. Hell, I mean, I barely knew who I was when I was 23, to be quite honest with you. I'm pretty confident that I know who I am now, but you know, I didn't really have a fully formed sense of who Richard Carr was until probably around the age of 23 or 24, right? I think that it's taking people longer to sort themselves out these days, and that's something that again we're going to come back to when we talk about the concept of emerging adulthood. So I can relate to that, Brianna. I'm 10 years older than you, basically. I'll be turning 38 in June. But I can definitely relate to still figuring things out in my late 20s. That was still going on for sure. To some degree, although I'm starting to have things sorted out by that point, but I definitely still had some sorting out to do. We all still do. It's never fully formed. We're never fully sorted out. So, you get into early adulthood, and according to Erikson, the crisis of this stage is intimacy versus isolation. And it's, this is where I am right now, right? I'm in that range, and I can definitely tell you that once you get into a career, if you're fortunate enough, as I've been, to get into a stable career by the time you're in your 30s and or 20s even. I got hired at this job when I was, I think, 27, but I've been here like 12 years. So it was 26 or 27 when I started teaching here. But if you're fortunate enough, as I've been, to find yourself in a productive career in early adulthood, and I hope you do, because it's highly rewarding to be doing something that you love, whatever it is. If you're fortunate enough to be in that boat, it can be highly tempting to just completely just give yourself to your career and completely neglect your social life and your relationships and your family, if you choose to have one, right? But that's the conflict, right? Are you going to isolate yourself, right? Are you going to get lost in yourself and the drama of young adulthood and of career and the drive for success? And there's nothing wrong with those things, of course. I mean, I'm certainly in the middle of that. But at the same time, how much do you want to sacrifice when it comes to matters of the heart, right, for accomplishment? So that's something to consider balancing out, right? That's a struggle that some folks will struggle with during adulthood, is balancing ambition with social relationships. I'll put it that way. And I don't know if anybody can relate to that. I'm glad to see that you guys are relating to much of what I'm talking about, looking at the chat. So as we move into middle adulthood, this is the stage of what Erikson referred to as generativity versus stagnation. So at this point, the assumption is that if things have gone well for you, and hopefully they have, by this point, you're in a career, maybe you've got a family, right? Maybe you don't, like I consider what I have to be a family. I'm married, and we've got, how many kids do we have now? We've got the turtle, we've got 2 cats and a dog, right? Those are our children, right? No offense to those of you who have real human children. I know sometimes that offends people when child-free people refer to their pets as their children. I'm aware that offends some parents, so I don't need to do that. But yeah, we're a child-free couple, and we're committed to that. We're very happy with that. And that's the balance that we've struck, right? We give all our attention to each other and to our careers, basically. And there's nothing left for kids there, right? And we're just aware of that. And more people have made the decision to be child-free these days, which is another thing that we'll be talking about, right? But when you're getting into middle age, the question of generativity versus stagnation is the question of, am I happy with how things are going, right? Or do I need a change of course, right? Am I happy with my career? Am I happy with my family situation, with my marriage? Do I want a career change? Do I want to continue to stay in this marriage? Am I happy with the way things have been going in my life, right? You're kind of reassessing, right? And if the answer is yes to that question, then you have what is referred to by Erikson as a sense of generativity. Things are going well, right? Full steam ahead, things are going well, steady as she goes. On the other hand, maybe not. Maybe you've become disillusioned with your career or your marriage or whatever it is. If you want to join a new religion, who knows? Whatever it is, whatever huge change you're considering, right? But it's oftentimes during middle age, according to Erikson and other theorists we'll look at, when oftentimes folks will reassess their lives and decide to make a career change. Go back to school, for example. Get a degree that, maybe get that degree that you didn't get when you were younger, that you always thought about getting, right? Or maybe, trying that crazy idea that you always dreamed about, but, now's the time, right? So the point is you want to avoid what's called stagnation, what he referred to as stagnation. So finally, as we get into late adulthood, and we have to expand these out because people are living longer now, right? People are living a lot longer. But here the point is that you're at the end of your life, and you can kind of be proud of what you've done, right? You can have a sense of integrity about yourself. Yeah, I'm happy I did what I did. I don't have a lot of regrets, or maybe not so much. Maybe you have a lot of regrets, but unfortunately there's not a lot of time left to do much about that, right? And that's kind of sad to be in that boat. So those are Erikson's stages. And to me, Erikson's model makes a lot more sense than Freud's, to be quite honest with you. Like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot, like I said last time with Freud, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Freud had some good ideas. The subconscious was a great idea. It's true. People are often unaware of what's really bothering them, although it's not always sexual like Freud thought that it was. But to me, Erikson's ideas just they jive more, right? It just makes more intuitive sense to me. Now, of course, that's not science. An idea making more sense, a theory making more sense doesn't prove that the theory is truer than another theory. But intuitively, though, I do feel that there's some degree of there's a degree of generality to Freud's stages that seems like it's more applicable to more people, right? But again, with Freud, we don't want to disregard him, right? Because this idea of the subconscious is incredibly powerful. The idea of the defense mechanism is very helpful in psychotherapy, and there are a lot of Freudian ideas that are still with us that we just kind of take for granted, But Freud was very much a mixed bag. I think Erikson's ideas are much less controversial. Erikson's ideas are a lot more family friendly. I'll give you that. All right, so the next person that I want to talk about is, actually I need to backtrack because there were some slides that I skipped to talk about the stages. Okay, so we've talked about Freud. I don't know how these slides got out of order, guys, I apologize. We talked about Freud. We talked about Erikson. So Freud and Erikson are the two major psychodynamic theorists. And as to Tiffany's comment about early childhood, yes, both Freud and Erikson would agree with that early childhood is critical. Erikson never disagreed with Freud about that. Erikson never disagreed with Freud that the subconscious existed. He never disagreed with Freud that early childhood trauma mattered. He just disagreed with Freud on the idea of development stopping in adolescence. And he disagreed with Freud that everything was driven by sexuality. But But definitely, Erickson and Freud were in full agreement on the importance of early childhood, for sure. And in fact, just about everyone's in full agreement on that these days, in some way or fashion. But Freud was really the first person to say it, so we've got to give him props for that. So the what's up? I'm live. What's up?
Yeah, I don't know who invented knock-knock jokes, but Freud invented your mom jokes.
Oh, so my wife there, I don't know if you heard her. My wife is trained as a behaviorist, so that was perfectly timed because I'm about to talk about behaviorism. I don't know if she did that on purpose, but she must have been dropping eaves, Mr. Frodo. But yeah, my wife has her master's degree in applied behavior analysis, which is the modern term for behaviorist psychology. So the behaviorists, of which my wife is a member of their ranks, they were highly critical and are highly critical of psychodynamic theories of development. Because the behaviorists were of the position that that psychology needed to be more scientific, right? And the only thing that science can do is measure things, right? The behaviorists said that psychology should only concern itself with that which we can measure, right? And the only things that you can really measure about people, according to the behaviorists, are their behavior, right? So a behavior is just anything that you do with your body, right? So the words coming out of my mouth, am I not sharing my screen, guys? Is that the case? I thought I was.
I can see it just fine.
Huh. Okay, I don't know what's going on, Brianna. Chloe. Sorry. Yeah, it must be a tech issue on your end. I apologize for that. But the behaviorists, they were very critical of the Freudians because the Freudians talked about a lot of stuff that's very difficult to measure, right? I mean, how do you measure a defense mechanism, right? How do you quantify that and do science on it, right? How do you measure an id, right, or an ego or a super ego? Oh yeah, that'll do it. Yep, cool. So how do you measure those things, right? You can't really quantify them very well, right? That's not to say that maybe they don't exist. I mean, not everything that exists is necessarily measurable, although some philosophers would argue with me about that, if you are logical positivists. But it's really difficult to measure Freud's ideas and to do science on them and to empirically verify them using the scientific method. And psychologists are supposed to be scientists, right? So that's the behaviorist big criticism of Freud is basically that you can't really test any of these ideas, right? You can't measure you can't measure any of these Freudian constructs or ideas.
You can't measure your mom.
It's not what your mom said, but in any case, yeah, she does that. Like she'll drop in sometimes and put in her behaviorist 2 cents. I love my wife. So behaviorism is this view that psychology should be a science, right? It should be a proper hard science. And it should only stick to studying things that can be measured. And the only things that you can really measure about a person are, their behaviors, right? What they do with their body, right? We are kind of cute. I'm not gonna lie. We would have had a cute kid, but nah. Anyway, yeah, nah. So in any case, the behaviorists believe that that what we should study should be measurable, right? We should only study what's measurable, and some of the names associated with the behaviorist schools of thought are names like John B. Watson, who did the little Albert experiment, also Ivan Pavlov before him. Ivan Pavlov and John B. Watson were known for championing a type of learning called classical conditioning, right? So the behaviorists were first known for classical conditioning, which was famously discovered by Ivan Pavlov. And if you've taken a intro psych course, you've probably come across this. But just in case you haven't, I want to show you guys a quick video clip on classical conditioning to make sure that you guys know what I'm talking about here. And a lot of you guys will probably have already, but just trying to get out of this full screen view here. There we go. Let me see if I can find this YouTube video, guys. Give me a second here. I apologize. I was running late before class. I got caught in some traffic heading home, and I didn't have a lot of time to prep, and now I'm paying for that. So my apologies. Let's see, Pavlov, classical conditioning. There's a video that I usually like to use. Is this it? I think this is the one. We'll find out. I'm going to play it. All right. I hope this is the video that I'm thinking that it is, and not some other crappier one. If it's some other crappier one, I apologize in advance.
Behavioral psychologists have come up with new views, not only of animal behavior, but of human nature as well. And these views all concern a process that we take for granted, learning, because we are all truly born to learn. Ironically, one of the most important figures in the study of learning, Ivan Pavlov, wasn't concerned with the subject at all, at least not at first. Pavlov, a noted Russian scientist, won the Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine in 1904. As this original footage shows, Pavlov was initially interested in digestion and the action of the salivary glands. By diverting the saliva of dogs into test tubes, he could precisely measure if and how much they salivated during digestion. When food was presented, the dog salivated quickly, an inherited salivary reflex. But over repeated testings, a strange thing happened. The dog salivated before contact with the food. Just the sight of the food was enough to stimulate their drooling. Then, just seeing the food dish, or even hearing the footsteps of Pavlov or his assistants, was enough to trigger this built-in reflex. What was going on to elicit this response? Pavlov decided to find out by systematically varying the stimuli and measuring the dog's reaction. Metronomes, lights, and bells were all used as stimuli, and they all worked as stand-ins for the food. What mattered was not the kind of stimulus that was used, but the fact that it reliably signaled that food was on the way. Pavlov had discovered a fundamental type of learning called classical conditioning. An original stimulus elicits an automatic, unlearned response. Both stimulus and response happen naturally. They are unconditioned. Then a second, neutral stimulus that never elicits the unconditioned response by itself is introduced just before the presentation of the original stimulus. If the neutral or signaling stimulus is presented alone, and a response occurs as if the original stimulus were still there, we say that conditioning has taken place. The arbitrary neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus. The reverse is also true. Pavlov and others studied the extinction over time of such conditioned responses. When the subject learns that the conditioned stimulus no longer signals a desired event, the acquisition process is reversed, as the learned connection is gradually weakened. Pavlov's work, and the work of those who followed him, led to a remarkable conclusion, and that is, any stimulus an organism can perceive is capable of eliciting any reaction the organism is capable of making. This means that virtually any sound, sight, or smell can influence the way our muscles tense or relax, our moods fluctuate, or even the way our attitudes are formed. For instance, if I say, relax, and then do this, you're going to be startled and upset. After 5 or 6 pairings of relax, just saying the word relax is going to generate a negative response rather than its usual learned reaction.
Hi, I'm Brian Collin, and today's episode is on Pavlov's theory of classical.
Okay, so that was the discovery of what's known as classical conditioning, and originally discovered by Pavlov. He won the Nobel Prize for that, and it was then John B. Watson who took that research and applied it to humans through the famous Little Albert experiment. And in that experiment, get back to my slides here. In that experiment, John B. Watson basically used classical conditioning to train this child to be terrified of furry animals. So basically what he did was, at first he brought the child in and exposed the child to various fuzzy animals. I think there was a dog, there was a rat, a rabbit. And the child was very interested in playing with these animals and petting them. The child was not afraid of them at all. But then Watson paired the presentation of the animals with the banging of a loud bell. So he had his research assistant bang a loud bell while presenting the animal to the child. And the loud bell terrified the child, and after several repeated pairings of this, the child would become terrified simply by seeing the animal, even if there was no bell being rung, right? So through classical conditioning, John B. Watson had trained Albert to be terrified of animals, as the story goes. Now, of course, this sort of research would be considered highly unethical today, and John B. Watson was not particularly a nice guy. The history books have not been kind to him in that way. He was a known philanderer, for example. He actually was cheating on his wife with his research assistant, Rosalie Rayner, who helped him conduct that study. But, he was not the nicest guy. And as the story goes, not Watson, but little Albert grew up. Legend has it that little Albert grew up to be, he kind of grew up to not like animals for the rest of his life, right? Like for his whole life after that, he kind of hated animals from what reports I could gather. So basically Watson had created this lifelong fear of animals in Albert, right? In little Albert, yeah. So we now know that phobias are classically conditioned responses, right? Now, the upside of that research is that you can also use classical conditioning to undo phobias, right? So classical conditioning is a double-edged sword. You can use it to form a phobia, and you can also use it to treat a phobia. And actually, some of the best psychological treatments utilize classical conditioning to treat phobias, and they also utilize what's called operant conditioning, which is what I want to talk about next, which was championed by the behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner. So B.F. Skinner was probably the most famous of all the behaviorists, but B.F. Skinner most famously popularized the terms reinforcement and punishment, right? So a reinforcer is any consequence of a behavior that makes the behavior more likely to happen again, right? So for example, I go to work, I get paid, I come back to work. On the other hand, a punisher is any consequence of a behavior that makes me less likely to repeat a behavior in the future, right? So let's say, for example, you know, I go to the effort of cooking my wife a romantic meal, right? Or at least I attempt to. But let's say I'm a terrible cook, right? And let's say hypothetically, my wife were to come home and come through the door and immediately gag at the smell of whatever I had cooked. Let's say maybe I burnt something, right? Or maybe let's just say it smelled terrible. Like some things smell terrible when you cook them, like red cabbage, for example. Oh, right. But in any case, you know, let's say you come home and you know, your wife comes home and the first thing they do when they smell the food that you've cooked is they throw up from the smell, right? Well, you know, you might find that discouraging enough to it might be a while before you try to cook another meal for your spouse, right? You might find that to be a little bit discouraging. That might be a little punishing, right? So that would be a punishing consequence. Any consequence of a behavior that makes the behavior less likely to be repeated. Jesse, you scratched your cornea on a pool, had to get your eyes cleaned out 3 times. Wow, yeah, that's. So I take it, Jesse, that you don't wear contacts? Too soon? I take it you're not a contact person. But in all seriousness, that's terrible. That's a terrible experience. I'm sorry you had to go through that. So the behaviorist perspective, you know, is associated with the work of Pavlov, Watson, and Skinner. And what they all have in common, though, is that they believe that the environment is the most important thing in shaping a person, right? You remember the nature versus nurture debate? You remember that blank slate TED Talk that we watched from Steven Pinker? You know, going back to that debate, the behaviorists, they definitely fall on the side of the nurture argument, right? So the behaviorists say that it's the environment that is the central shaper of humanity, and it's not genetics or biology, right? So the behaviorists have fallen on the nurture side of the debate. Although I would say modern behaviorists, if any are listening, I will say that modern behaviorists have become better about this. The modern behaviorist movement has gotten better about acknowledging the role of genetics in shaping behavior. They still tilt towards environment, but they have gotten better. Thoughts, comments at this point? What do you say we guys, we take a 5-minute bathroom break or a water break or whatever break, and we come back here at 7:15. All right. All right. So here we are. And I'm about to queue up a couple more. Actually, I think just one more video that I want to show you guys tonight. So I have it ready when the time comes. All right, we are in business. So we had discussed Erikson before we went to break, and now I want to talk about a few more theorists before taking a break from lecture to discuss some of the basics of research methods. We're not going to spend a significant, I'm just kind of looking through and seeing what left we have to talk about tonight here. That's our last night on chapter 1. I will talk about research methods a little bit. It's not going to be a central focus in this class. I do want you guys to have a basic understanding of the different types of research methods, but I don't know if I'm going to dive into all of these. Basically, I just want you guys to know the difference between descriptive, correlational, and experimental research. So that's what I'll touch on in terms of research methods after we get through theory. But I have a fair amount more left to get through in theory before we get into research methods. But that's kind of what we have left to get through tonight. We have to cover a lot of material in a short period of time in these compressed night classes. So onward we go. So I want to talk a little bit about Albert Bandura here. So Bandura is known for what's loosely affiliated with behavioral theory. Sometimes people will count Bandura as a behaviorist also. It's a loose association. I don't know if I would count Bandura as a behaviorist, but he definitely explored learning, just like the behaviorists did, but he explored learning from a social standpoint. Albert Bandura is known for social learning theory, which emphasizes the fact that we learn through watching the behaviors of other people, right? Who Bandura referred to as models, right? So a model is another person. If we're a child, it's often our peers or adults, but a model is another person that we look to imitate their behavior. And the classic experiment of this is what's known as the Bobo doll study here. Let's see if I can get that actually on screen for you guys. Bobo doll. This is another classic here, and I meant to pull this video up also, but let's do it now. Bandura. So this was a classic experiment here, done by Bandura, I believe, back in the 60s. And I swear people think that Olive Road is the Talladega Speedway. I live right on Olive Road, and I watch people drive by out my window, and it's like, I swear this person that just went by must have been going at least 80 miles an hour, maybe 100. I sound like one of these ornery characters from a Clint Eastwood movie. Get off my lawn! Like, stop driving so fast. Like, I'm becoming a fart. I used to be one of those kids driving fast on Olive Road. I grew up in this house, and now I'm complaining about other people. Yeah, I'm becoming an old fart. It's official. Okay, so let's watch the Bobo Doll video from Bandora.
The segment you're about to see is taken from an early experiment on learning of aggressive styles of behavior through modeling. Children watched a filmed adult perform novel aggressive acts toward a inflated doll, and the physical aggression was accompanied by novel hostile remarks. We later measured how much of this modeled aggression the children had learned just by watching. Now, the measurement of learning of aggression uses simulated targets rather than live ones. For example, to test how well bombardiers have learned bombing strategies, you would use simulated targets rather than require them to bomb San Francisco or New York. The model pummeled the doll with a mallet, flung it in the air, kicked it repeatedly, threw it down and beat it. It was once widely believed that seeing others vent aggression would drain the viewer's aggressive drive. As you can see, exposure to aggressive modeling is hardly cathartic. Exposure to aggressive modeling increased attraction to guns, even though it was never modeled. Guns had less appeal to children who had no exposure to the aggressive modeling. The children also picked up the novel hostile language. The room contained varied play materials, and
So that's a classic experiment, and that was an illustration of what is commonly referred to as observational learning. And Bandura also had another idea that that he referred to as reciprocal determinism. And reciprocal determinism was Bandura's idea that the relationship between the individual and the environment is a two-way relationship, which is, when you think about it, not a terribly controversial idea, kind of common sense, but it's the idea that not only do our environments shape us, but that we also shape our environments, right? So there's a back and forth reciprocal relationship between the influence of the environment and the influence of the person, right? So the environment's shaping the person, but the person's also shaping the environment. I'm just going to momentarily respond to a private text here. So Bandura is really well known for social learning theory, and a lot of his adherents, a lot of folks who follow in Bandura's line of thinking have been the folks who have been really fierce advocates for controlling the sort of media that children consume because of its possible behavioral effects, from observational learning. So, this is the idea that we would want to discourage children from consuming violent video games, that sort of thing. Okay, so Jean Piaget is a huge name in the area of child development, particularly the area of child cognitive development. So cognitive development is what we're talking about when we talk about the development of the intellect. So abilities like reasoning, decision-making, memory, judgment, the use of your intelligence, all of these things are what we would refer to as cognition, right, in psychology. And one thing that's abundantly clear when you look at children is that, children's minds operate a little bit differently than adults, right? Cognitively, children are different than adults. You don't have to be a psychologist to know that, right? And it was Piaget who really got the ball rolling when it came to studying the cognitive development of children. His model of cognitive development proposes that children pass through four major stages of cognitive development. And some of these four major stages have sub-stages that we'll be talking about as we move through the course. We'll definitely be giving Piaget's stages a lot of attention, particularly in the first few chapters. But Piaget proposed several stages of cognitive development that we pass through, and in the next slide you'll see his proposed stages. But he said that there are kind of three concepts that are central to all of the stages that we're passing through. And what is the idea of the scheme, right? A schema or scheme is Piaget's term for a person's understanding of some concept, right? So for example, if you, in your mind's eye, imagine, a doctor's office. Imagine what would be there. Picture a doctor's office in your mind's eye. What do you see? Now, you don't have to actually respond and tell me, but I'm sure you have a picture in your head, right? In this case, what you're coming up with is your scheme or your schema for a doctor's office, right? Based upon all your past experiences, right? So in your head, maybe you imagined, an examination chair with maybe a couple of other chairs on the side, maybe a counter with a sink in it, maybe a jar of cotton balls and a jar of wooden sticks that get put down your throat to check your gag reflex, right? Maybe there's a stethoscope sitting somewhere. You know, maybe there's some posters on the wall that that say structures of the inner ear, right, or some such, you know, anatomy and physiology stuff, right? What I just described to you was my scheme for a doctor's office based upon all the experiences that I've had in doctor's offices over the years, right? So the scheme is your understanding of whatever concept we're talking about, right? But your schema are constantly growing and evolving throughout the lifespan, according to Piaget. And the way in which this happens is through the dual process of assimilation and accommodation. So through the process of assimilation, we put new information into our old categories of knowledge. However, when we engage in accommodation, we have to create new categories because the information that we've encountered doesn't fit into our old categories, right? So when we accommodate, we have to update our schema. When we assimilate, we're just fitting that information into our previous understanding, right? But sometimes we encounter things in life that cause us to have to reevaluate our categories or to create new categories. And that's the process of accommodation. So the stages that that Piaget proposed are listed here in this slide. Don't worry, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about them in future chapters. You don't have to have them memorized tonight. But those stages are the sensory motor stage, the pre-operational stage, the concrete operational stage, and the formal operational stage. So just as a preview, we'll dive into each of these in more depth in the future. But the sensory motor stage is the first stage of development in which the child is learning to physically interact with the world, learning how to use their bodies. The pre-operational stage is the stage of magical thinking. It's the stage when children learn to speak. It's the stage of the gaining of what's called symbolic capacity, which is the ability to manipulate symbols like words and numbers, for example. The concrete operational stage is late childhood, and this is the stage when children are kind of gaining a more logical understanding of the world that's based upon cause and effect, and you're moving away from the magical thinking of early childhood in the pre-operational period. Formal operational stage, last stage of cognitive development, according to Piaget, yet another person who said that development stopped at adolescence. Some of the early theorists had a bad habit of doing that. The formal operational stage is the point at which you start learning to really think in ideological terms, abstract concepts, right? And yeah, my wife is a middle school teacher, and she could talk to you all day long, Jesse, about the behavior of kids these days. She might agree with what you know. She teaches at Warrington Middle School, which is a rough school, to put it mildly. Okay, so actually, before I talk about Vygotsky, actually, I want to go ahead and play the longer video that I wanted to play tonight. It's about 25 minutes, 28 minutes long. This is part of an older series, an educational series called Discovering Psychology. It's a series from that. It's an episode from that series. This episode is called The Developing Child. And in this video, you will become a little bit more familiar with Piaget's ideas, and you'll also hear some of the other ideas that we've been discussing, talked about in the video as well. So this video will provide a good multimedia recap and also not just a recap, but also a, what's the word I'm looking for? It will expound on some of the things that I've already talked about. Will elaborate, that's the word I was looking for. It will provide elaboration on things that I've already been talking about. I think I'm losing my steam, guys. All right, so let's take a look at this video called The Developing Child. It's part of the Discovering Psychology video series. This is a video series that came out in the I want to say late 80s, early 90s. So it's a little bit old, you know, in terms of the cultural references and the graphics and the hairdos. There's a lot that we can make fun of. However, the information in the video is still very solid. So if you can get past the retro, we'll just call it retro, okay? We'll just call it retro.
Annenberg Media.
How much do we know when we come into the world? Can we learn to outgrow shyness? What powers of reasoning does a 6-month-old have?
Remember, Big Snoopy's in the same place where Little Snoopy's hiding.
Can a 2.5-year-old understand symbols? The Developing Child, this time on Discovering Psychology. About 200 years ago, the new science of mental medicine, an early version of psychology, captured the fancy of philosophers, educators, and physicians. They debated about the true essence of human beings and the difference between people and animals. On one side of the debate was the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who believed that people are born with all the skills and qualities that make them who they are. For Rousseau, it is nature, that which we bring into the world at birth, that most affects our development. We are born noble savages, only to be corrupted by our experiences in society. On the other side of the debate was the English philosopher, John Locke. For Locke, a baby is merely a blank tablet, devoid of any knowledge or skills. It is only experience, that which we learn as we are nurtured by other people and by society, that determines who we become. And so in time, the debate became known as nature versus nurture. In 1800, the debate was sharpened by the discovery of a wild 12-year-old child, a naked savage boy who had apparently lived alone in the forests of Aveyron, France. Here was a child with no experience of human nurturing at all, only of nature. A young doctor, Jean-Marie Itard, tried to civilize and educate the boy, whom he named Victor. At first, his intensive program seemed to be working. Victor learned how to avoid danger and how to follow instructions. But after 5 years, all progress stalled. Itard reluctantly called off the training program. Victor died at the age of 40, still unable to speak and behave like an ordinary man. For many, the case of the wild boy of Aveyron was proof that nature, more than nurture, affects human development, that the new environment could not overcome Victor's basic imperfections. But others held that we are more the products of our environment than we are blind followers of our natural genetic inheritance. But which is true? What skills and knowledge are we born with? And what do we have to learn from others? Today, we'll try to find out by exploring how developmental psychologists investigate the contributions of both heredity and environment to the development of a child.
Oh, no way we're doing a beautiful job.
Have you ever wondered what a baby sees when it's born?
Sweet baby. Oh, my sweetheart. Oh, baby. He's crying already. Oh, sweet. Nice job.
How it experiences the world. What it likes and dislikes. How helpless it is. For William James, America's foremost psychologist at the turn of the century, an infant was a totally confused and helpless organism. James believed that babies are assailed on all sides by overwhelming sensations. In his words, one great blooming, buzzing confusion, in contrast to the tranquility of life in the womb. In the late 1920s, John Watson, the founder of behaviorism, described the infant as a lively, squirming bit of flesh, capable of making a few simple responses. And as recently as 1964, a medical textbook proclaimed that newborns cannot focus their eyes or respond to sounds. And many doctors still believe that babies cannot feel pain, but they're all wrong. For the past 20 years, research has pointed to an opposite conclusion. That babies come into the world ready to perform all sorts of amazing feats. A few minutes after birth, a newborn's eyes can turn in the direction of a voice, searching for the source of sounds it prefers. It can reach out a hand and make contact, and turn its head to follow a moving face. New research is showing that babies are also born with likes and dislikes. As early as 12 hours of age, they show pleasure at the taste of vanilla, and they smile when they smell bananas, but they recoil from the taste of shrimp. And their hearing functions even before birth, so infants are prepared to respond to certain sounds as soon as they leave the womb. They prefer female voices. They're lulled to sleep by the sound of a heartbeat, and they can immediately recognize their mother's speech. Vision, however, is less well developed. Babies are born legally blind, with about 20/500 vision. The reason is twofold. Newborns don't have enough cone cells functioning in their retinas, nor are there enough connections among the neurons in the visual cortex of the brain. But both develop very rapidly. A 1-month-old can detect the contours of a head at close distances. A 7-week-old smiles as it scans its mother's face. A 2-month-old can distinguish colors. And a 3-month-old can bring distant objects into focus, almost as well as an adult. At 3 months, a baby can also perceive contrast well enough to detect differences in facial expressions, reacting differently to faces that look happy, surprised, sad, or neutral. So it seems that human infants are a lot less helpless than previously believed. In fact, they are well equipped to accomplish the 3 basic tasks of infancy: getting the sustenance they need, defending against harmful stimulations, and making social contact. But if babies can't talk to us, you might wonder how we presume to know what they see, think, or feel. The answer is that developmental researchers note what infants can do. Then they infer what meaning certain patterns of behavior have for the infant. For example, babies can move their eyes to look at things. They can reach out to touch objects, and they can suck liquids. These simple behaviors are then used to index their abilities and their psychological states. Babies prefer novelty to familiarity. Too much of the same thing quickly loses its appeal. This decrease in response to any repeated event is known as habituation. When the baby responds to another stimulus in a way that shows it perceives that stimulus to be different, the response is known as dishabituation. Together, habituation and dishabituation are one key to understanding a baby's mental processes. Researchers use the amount of time a baby spends looking at objects and its heart rate as measures of attention, preferences, or perceptual ability. Changes in the rate of sucking, smiling, sticking out the tongue, and crying can also be used to measure a response to different events. In 1958, psychologist Robert Fance started the tradition of using a baby's preference for looking at something new as a form of silent speech. Fance also observed that babies preferred objects that have contours to those that are plain, complex ones over simple ones, and whole faces over parts of faces that are jumbled up. But the researcher who most contributed to our understanding of what children know is Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget.
La période préscolaire est, psychologiquement parlant, une période tout à fait fondamentale.
Piaget didn't use fancy lab equipment, but rather simple demonstrations that yielded generalizations about the workings of a child's mind. Consider how a child understands that when the appearance of something changes, it doesn't necessarily mean that the object itself has changed. In one of Piaget's demonstrations, two of the same size glasses are filled with equal amounts of colored liquid. The contents of one of the glasses is poured into a tall container.
Now, would you say that there's the same amount of juice in the two cups? Or does one have more, or does the other have more?
This one has more.
This one has more?
Yeah.
Why do you say that one has more?
Because it's skinnier.
6-year-olds believe that the tall container now has more liquid than the glass. 7-year-olds are uncertain, and 8-year-olds know that despite appearances, nothing has really changed.
Because this glass is just taller, but so you just done just to call it just I was in here and pour it in there.
Fine.
And that just filled it up, but the only thing is still the same amount.
Good. That's very good thinking.
The amount of colored liquid remains the same, no matter what container it's in. Its volume is conserved. But for all the value of Piaget's work, he, like many others, underestimated the age at which children develop various skills, because he confused their physical ability with their ability to understand. Often, children's mental functioning develops before their ability to make a certain physical response. At the University of Illinois, a team of researchers is now using ingenious experiments to discover previously unsuspected abilities of newborns and young children.
3 months, 23 days.
Professor René Bellajon studies how babies develop the concept of object permanence.
By object permanence, we mean really a set of beliefs about objects. The first and most fundamental belief is that objects continue to exist when hidden. The first person to investigate the development of object permanence beliefs in infants was Jean Piaget, the famous Swiss psychologist. And he claimed that it's not until approximately 8 to 9 months of age that infants understand that objects continue to exist when hidden, and that it's not until approximately 12 months of age that babies begin to understand that objects not only exist but retain their physical and spatial properties when hidden. What we've done is to devise a series of tasks where the infant simply had to look at possible and impossible events.
In this experiment, a 6-month-old baby watches a cart rolling down tracks, going behind a screen and coming out the other side. The screen is lifted to show a block sitting behind the tracks. Next, the baby sees the block placed on top of the tracks. The screen comes down, the cart rolls exactly as before. But in the real world of permanent objects, the block should have stopped the cart. The baby stares longer at this apparently impossible event.
When infants are surprised or puzzled by an event, they tend to look at it longer. So our prediction is always that if infants perceive the events as we do, then they will look longer at the impossible or magical event than at the possible event. And what we found is that infants as young as 3.5 months of age, and perhaps younger, but certainly as young as 3.5 months of age, understand that objects continue to exist when hidden. One contribution of this research is to say that we must really take a very close look at infants' physical knowledge. It's much richer, much more sophisticated than used to be thought.
While Bayes-Jean works with babies, a colleague at the University of Illinois, Judy Deloche, focuses on cognitive development in older children, especially how they understand symbols.
The symbol is something that stands for something else. A symbol tells you about something other than itself. Now, symbolic ability is probably the main characteristic that sets human beings apart from other creatures. So one of the main developmental tasks for a young child is to start acquiring symbol systems. Children have to learn to speak, they eventually learn to read, and so forth. Now, what I'm looking at is the acquisition of a very early kind of symbolic understanding, and this is the child's understanding of a scale model. Understanding that this model that I showed the child, which looks like a little playroom, looks like a little doll's house, what I'm looking at is the child's understanding that this model represents something else, that it represents or stands for or is a symbol for a larger space, a larger room that corresponds to this model. Okay, Charlotte, here's Big Snoopy. Here's Little Snoopy. I'm going to hide Little Snoopy here in his little room, okay? You watch where I hide him. Now watch, I'm hiding him right there. See?
The subject
Little
here
Snoopy's right
is
there.
2.5-year-old Charlotte.
Now I'm going to go hide Big Snoopy in the same place in his big room, okay? And you wait right here, okay? You wait right here. I'm going to go hide Big Snoopy. Okay, Charlotte, can you come find Big Snoopy? Remember, Big Snoopy's hiding in the same place in his room where Little Snoopy's hiding. Where is Big Snoopy? No. Remember, Big Snoopy's in the same place where Little Snoopy's hiding. Yeah, where is he hiding? Can you find him? He's in the same place Little Snoopy is. You know, I think he's back there somewhere. Why don't you see if you can find him back there? Oh, look again. Did you find him? Good girl. There he is. There's Snoopy. Okay.
Marielle is 3 years old.
Look, here's Big Snoopy. And here's his friend Little Snoopy. I'm going to hide Little Snoopy here in his little room, okay? Now you watch while I hide Little Snoopy. And I'm hiding him right there, okay? He's hiding there. Now I'm going to take Big Snoopy, and I'm going to take Big Snoopy and hide him in the same place in his big room, okay? You wait right here while I go hide Big Snoopy. Okay. Here I go. Okay, Mario, Big Snoopy's hiding. Remember, he's hiding in the same place in his big room where Little Snoopy is. Can you find him? Come find Big Snoopy. Let's see where he is. Good girl. You found him, didn't you? He likes it. He likes for you to find him. Now, can you go find Little Snoopy? Where's Little Snoopy? Let's find him. Good girl, Marielle. You knew right where he was. Good for you. It's when you see a child going from just really not understanding something few weeks later, few months later, showing almost full comprehension of it, then you're so aware of the developmental process, and you're aware that children have this enormous amount to learn, and things that we just take for granted, the kid's in there thinking about it, working on it all the time, trying to work these things out, trying to figure out how the world operates. The 2-year-old's a very busy person cognitively. In fact, I think it's probably safe to say that a 2-year-old thinks more than you or I think, because they have so much more to figure out.
Other researchers utilize the visual cliff, developed in 1960 by Eleanor Gibson and Richard Walk. One side of a plexiglass sheet is painted, and the other side is transparent, with a painted pattern beneath it, creating the illusion of a drop.
Come here, Cameron. Look. Look. Come here. Oh,
This baby, who has just begun to crawl, will cross the drop.
Come here. You get that? You get... What a good baby.
Katie, what are you doing? You can crawl. Come here. Katie.
This baby, who has been crawling for over a month, will not cross.
Katie, come here.
The visual cliff is used to study the development of depth perception and the emotion of fear. From about 8.5 months on, children will not cross the cliff. This new emotion, fear of heights on the visual cliff, is made possible by the new experience of crawling.
Katie, can you come over here?
So newborns are not blank slates, and they're not completely helpless. In fact, they come into the world equipped to learn, think, and solve problems. And not only that, they're also equipped to charm their caretakers into relating to them. Considering how helpless they are and how hard it is to raise children, the human race might have died out a long time ago if babies weren't primed to be so cute. A baby's smile and coo may be the most effective survival mechanisms of all. Some babies, of course, smile more than others, which brings us to another critical part of each infant's primal makeup, one that goes beyond perceptual and cognitive abilities, and that's his or her temperament. Some babies are excitable and active, while others are calm and passive. This is true regardless of the culture. Such temperaments exhibited at birth are biologically based. They are constitutional tendencies that can affect the child's personality. Harvard psychologist Jerome Kagan has been studying inherited behavioral differences between timid and bold children. Kagan and his colleagues observed the children on closed-circuit television.
Our general view is this, that a small proportion of children, we think maybe 10 to 15%, but no more, are born with a slight push from nature to be either very outgoing, the way that child with the drum is, or with a slight bias to be fearful, vigilant, apprehensive, cautious. Although there are other temperamental variables, it might be that this is the most salient temperamental quality in mammals. That's just a possibility. So there's no fundamental difference in intellectual ability or abilities between the two groups.
Wow.
None of us believes parents should be fatalists. That is to say, we have many cases of parents who nature gave them a cautious child, and through gentle handling, introduction of their child to other peers, a gentle persuasion of their child to try to conquer their apprehensions, we have seen these children change. And therefore, there's no need to say, there's nothing I can do just because their child happened to begin life with a slight push in this direction.
So biology is not destiny. Born shy doesn't necessarily mean a lifetime of shyness. Later experiences can enable some to overcome their shyness while creating shyness in others. In addition to shyness, the personality trait that shows the most genetic influence is activity level. But once again, though biologically based, this trait can be modified by learning, training, and experience. Research with animals tells us more about these traits. Here at the National Institutes of Mental Health Animal Center, Stephen Sumi has been studying the behavior of genetically shy monkeys.
It appears that shyness is inherited, that is, genetic differences between individuals largely determine which individual will be shy. And those individuals that have this characteristic start showing it very early in life. Within the first 2 or 3 weeks of life, for example, we can begin to see differences between the shy monkeys and those that are not, because those that are not begin to leave their mother to explore, but the shy ones stay back and seek their mother's contact for protection. We've been able to change the behavior of some of our shy monkeys by rearing them with unusually nurturant foster mothers, mothers who are supportive and protective at all times. And with these mothers giving these monkeys a good firm basis and support network, they show good outgoing behavior, they interact readily with their peers, and in some cases they may turn out to be the dominant members of their social group. But if you take away the support network of these individuals, they revert right back to their shy behavior. It's almost as if you were turning a switch on and off. It looks like the basis for this shyness in monkeys is very similar, if not identical, to the basis for shyness in humans. We know this in terms of the types of behavior that are shown and at what points in development, where there are strong parallels. We know it in terms of the underlying physiological systems, where the same characteristics physiologically that identify our shy monkeys also can be found in shy humans. And we also believe that the connection is there because just like you can modify shy behavior in humans, you can also modify it in monkeys through certain types of experience.
There's also clear evidence that genetic influences are significant for some cognitive abilities, such as verbal skills, and for some kinds of psychopathology that surface later in life. It is also clear that environmental factors play an important role in any complex behavior or ability. Family experiences make us different, and so do our cultural backgrounds. While biological inheritance provides the potentials for development, environment determines if those potentials are realized. Thus, nature and nurture interact to mold all behavior. In our next program, we're going to explore one of the most remarkable accomplishments of the human species. It first occurs between the tender ages of 1 and 2 years old, but most of us don't stop for the rest of our lives. I'm talking about
All right, so I might use 1 or 2 other episodes from that series at some point in the future. It's a dated series, so I try to be selective about how much of it I utilize because it's so old. But old is not necessarily bad. So I want to talk a little bit about some other theorists. And then I have a few things that I want to say, some very basic, those basic of the basic level tour of, or just quick cursory glance at research methods, really, to be honest. I mean, I teach a whole course on that. We spend a fair amount of time talking about it in general psychology. I don't really feel that that this course is a course in which we need to focus heavily on research methods, but it is a good idea for folks to have at least a basic understanding of the different types of research. So we're going to look at that. Okay, so back to the slides. So in terms of cognitive development, the other major theorist who I want to mention here for a second is Lev Vygotsky. And Lev Vygotsky, he actually lived prior to Piaget. So it might have made sense for me to talk about him first, but the thing about Vygotsky is that his work was largely forgotten. And I apologize, I'm getting tired, guys, but Vygotsky's work was largely forgotten for many, many years. He was a Soviet psychologist who lived in Russia during the time of Stalin, I believe it was. And a lot of his work was kind of buried and forgotten about. But Lev Vygotsky was a Russian psychologist who was really interested in the impact of culture on our psychological development, particularly with regards to cognitive development. So he had this idea that became known as the zone of proximal development, which was this idea that our parents and our culture provide us this form of training in which we learn in this zone of development that he called the zone of proximal development. And I'm going to be spending more time talking about Vygotsky later, but so I'll come back to this idea. But the idea of the zone of proximal development is this idea that when we're being taught by a good teacher, there's this sweet spot for teaching where you're challenging someone to leave their comfort zone. You're kind of getting them outside of what they already know, but you're not taking them so far outside of what they know that it's overwhelming that they can't handle it, right? So the idea of the zone of proximal development is that things need to be sufficiently challenging when it comes to learning, right? Particularly with teaching children, things need to be sufficiently challenging so that we're out of our comfort zone, but at the same time, not so overwhelmingly challenging that that it's too much, right? So you want this balance between, meeting the child where they are, but also challenging them to get beyond it. But Vygotsky placed a really heavy emphasis on the idea of the idea of culture shaping our cognitive development and the idea of our social environment shaping our cognitive development. And the thing about Vygotsky that kind of was tragic was that he died young. He came down with tuberculosis and died at the age of 37, which is how old I am right now, right? So, that's kind of crazy, right? But he died really young, and he really never got to finish his work, but he generated some really cool ideas while he was alive, and his theory was kind of unfinished. He never really got to finish his work, but his work was it got kind of lost for years, and Piaget was all the rage. Everybody was talking about, Piaget, but his work was, Vygotsky's work was kind of rediscovered in recent years, in the last couple of decades. And folks have kind of been rediscovering him. And I can see why, because he does have some interesting ideas to offer when it comes to cognitive development. Information processing theory, but probably not, well, I shouldn't say that. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about information processing theory. Information processing theory takes a little bit of a different view of cognitive development, kind of views the human mind as sort of like a computer, right? Sort of like an information processing unit. And instead of seeing cognitive development as being in stages where you're very different from one stage to the next, they take more of a gradualist view. So the information processing theorists have kind of gotten away from this view of cognitive development being dominated by stages, and sees it more as something that is comprised of just kind of a slow but steady accumulation of skills. So development is less like a staircase, and it's more like a gently sloped hill, right? But folks from this line of thinking kind of see the mind as like a kind of like a computer, right? The brain is a computer made of meat, as I've heard it said, and the mind is seen as sort of an information processing unit, like Data here from the show Star Trek, right? For those of you who are familiar. Bronfenbrenner was also a Russian psychologist who came up with this theory of development that became known as ecological systems theory. also known as contextual theory. Vygotsky's theory is sometimes referred to as a contextual theory as well. But with Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, it's all about looking at the different contexts in which the individual is embedded, right? So you have these different contexts in which the self, the individual, is embedded, and these various systems, these various social, this is a very socially oriented view of development, but these various systems radiating outward comprise the various social and cultural systems that we're embedded in that shape our development, right? So you have the microsystem are it's the immediate social environment that you're in right now, right? And you have lots of different microsystems that that you might find yourself in, right? So you have the microsystem of your family, you have the microsystem of your school, of your church, whatever. The mesosystem is the overall, you might say that the mesosystem is kind of like all the different microsystems combined, kind of, but it's also kind of the local organizational structures like school systems and organized religion. These are the social structures immediately surrounding you that support you, that you're embedded in, right? And the exosystem is kind of like culture and like cultural values and history, right? Where you lie in the grand scheme of history, right? The time period that you're born in, right, affects your development, the time period that you live through. And I am sorry, guys, I am just crashing here. I have not had any coffee since noon, which was a mistake. So, and the chronosystem we have, which is the influence of time. I am such an old man. I am like ready to go to bed at 10 o'clock, I swear. Okay, so that's just a quick survey. Well, not so quick, we've been doing it for a couple of days. But that concludes our survey of the theoretical orientations in this discipline. And a lot of these we're going to be coming back to in later chapters. So, don't worry if you don't immediately have a full grasp of all of them. But kind of it, like I said, in these classes, we have to cover a significant amount of material in a short period of time. And the rest of the material in chapter 1 deals with the topic of research methods, right? How is it that social scientists, but particularly developmental psychologists, who we're focusing on in this class, how is it that psychologists and social scientists in general go about conducting research, right? And if you're really interested in this question, we teach research. We have a research methods class. I teach it. In fact, I'm teaching it right now. It's a Thursday class. It meets on Tuesday, Thursday afternoons. I think it's too late to register now, but I'm going to see if they can give me a section of it in the fall as well, because I'm loving teaching it, and teaching it for the first time this semester. But we spend an entire semester exploring these ideas in this class. So, I don't want to spend too much time covering a topic that we have a whole class on, right? But I do want you guys to have a basic understanding of really the different types of research that are done in the social sciences. I want you guys to have a basic understanding of the difference between correlational, or descriptive, correlational, and experimental research. So we'll do a quick little tour. What is going on here with my screen share? I'm thinking I'm rapidly becoming worthless here. Okay, so what is happening here? All right, let's try this again. Okay, it's just showing up weird. Like my slides are not displaying like they usually do. Like I'm so confused right now. Okay. No, it's not me here. There we go. Okay. I don't know if it looked any different on your end, but on my end, it was looking totally screwed up. Okay, that's what I want to see. Okay, so I want you guys to have, we've got a few minutes left, so I can talk about a little bit more of this stuff. I want you guys to have a basic understanding of the scientific method, right? So the scientific method relies on what's called empiricism, right? So we rely on our senses. We gather data that are observable using the senses, and we test our hypotheses using the tools of observation and statistical analysis. That's what the scientific method is all about, right? It's about observation, also known as empiricism. And I could spend a lot more time talking about the other assumptions and pillars of the scientific method, but the root of it all, essentially, is that the scientific method relies upon observation, right? We're not relying upon authority. We're not relying upon tradition to answer our questions. We rely upon observation, right? And if our observations do not support our hypotheses, then we have to come up with new hypotheses and theories, right? So I want you guys to have a basic understanding of the difference between descriptive research, correlational research, and experimental research, right? So descriptive research is the type of research that just simply involves describing what's happening, right? Now, there are different ways that you can do descriptive research. One way that you can do descriptive research is to do a case study. So, for example, Sigmund Freud, and I just need to shift here in my chair because I'm just getting restless. I like to lecture standing up, walking around the classroom. I've never really fully been, quite honestly, a fan of sitting while lecturing. But in any case, with a case study, you have a type of descriptive research in which you're interviewing a small number of people, maybe only one person, right? Maybe only one patient. But Freud was really a big fan of the case study. You can gather really a lot of in-depth, rich data about a person when you study one person in depth, right? But it's very time-consuming and expensive. Naturalistic observation involves the recording of data when you're recording a person or an animal in their natural environment, right? So for example, my wife's a middle school teacher, and what if they wanted to know, how often students were getting into fights, right, at the school, right? They have a lot of fights there at that school, right? Now, I couldn't tell you exactly how many, but they have a lot, right? Now, what if they wanted to get a better handle on this, right? They wanted to get a more accurate count of how often aggression is happening at the school, however you want to define that, right? So you would define what aggression means first. First, you have to define it. That's what we call an operational definition, right? But once you've defined your terms, then you can go in and you can observe, right? And you can observe all of the instances of aggression and record them. This would be naturalistic observation, right? Because we're not saying why the aggression is happening. We're not doing any experiments. We're not even correlating the aggression with anything at this point. We're just simply reporting how often it's happening, right? So that's naturalistic observation. You can also do observation in a laboratory setting, which is more controlled. So, there are pros and cons to doing your observations in the real world versus laboratory, right? Some of the upsides of doing your observations in the real world is that, it's more realistic, right? It's less contrived. You get a better sense of how people really behave in the real world because you're looking at the real world. The downside to that, though, is you can't really make any causal statements, right? Because you don't really have laboratory control. You can't really rule out alternative explanations. It's only really when you can control things, right? When you can control things and hold things constant and do a real experiment where you can make causal statements about things. So you can control things more in a laboratory. But with descriptive research, you're really just describing what's happening, right? Another very common way to do descriptive research is through survey research. That's pretty self-explanatory. Most of us have probably filled out a survey of some kind at some point in our life. It's just simply a verbal or written questionnaire. Now, there are ways of going about survey research. Some ways are better than others, right? And we spend a whole chapter in research methods talking about the do's and don'ts of survey research. But one problem with survey research is what we call social desirability, which is a tendency that some folks may often have to answer in a way that they think is expected of them, right? You know, they want to please the researcher. Or make themselves look good, right? So that's something you have to contend with. But descriptive research is just simply describing what's happening. Another type of descriptive research is interview data, right? Now, if you're interviewing more than one person at once, we call that a focus group. But what all of these descriptive measures have in common is that you're just simply describing something that's happening. That's a really cute baby in the EEG cap, I gotta say. You know what, I may not want any kids of my own, but the babies are freaking cute, I gotta say. Especially when they're wearing an EEG cap. Okay, so correlational research is our next level up, right? In terms of research vigor, right? With correlational research, we're looking at two relationships. We're looking at a relationship between two or more variables, is what I was trying to say. So, for example, you know, let's say we do a study and we find that as watching TV violence goes up, you know, aggressive behavior among children. You know, the more TV aggressive children watch, the higher their aggressive behavior, right? The more fights they get into or whatever. Can we then say that watching TV causes the aggression? No, because we haven't done a real proper experiment, right? All we know is that that watching, you know, violent media and getting into fights are correlated, right? But we don't know, you know, we don't know if watching the violent media is really causing the violent behavior. It might be something completely other than, you know, the violent media causing the violent behavior. Maybe, you know, maybe there's something going on in this kid's life, right? You know, that's causing the violent behavior other than the violent TV shows, right? Or maybe it's that, you know, more violent kids just like to watch more violent TV shows. Maybe they were more violent to begin with, and more violent people just like to watch more violent media, perhaps, right? So what's causing, what's the true cause and what's the effect, right? There's always this possibility that there's a third variable involved with correlational research. I'll give you a classic example of this. So there is in fact, there's a video on this. If you guys bear with me for a second, I wasn't going to show you, this is a real quick video clip. I wasn't going to show you guys another video clip tonight, but I just remembered that there's this really clever little video that I found. Just give me a second to track it down here. There's this clever, funny little video clip that I found that gives a great humorous explanation of the difference between cause and effect, you know, when we're talking about correlation, right? So this is a great little blurb on issues with correlational research and what we call the third variable problem, and the reason why we say that correlation does not equal causation. All right, so I think I finally got it pulled up here. So this video is called How Ice Cream Kills: Correlation and Causation. Yes, you heard it right. How Ice Cream Kills. Are you intrigued? I was when I heard the title. Yes, you heard it right. And hopefully by the end of this video, you will join me in wanting to advocate for an ice cream-free world. All right, so let's look at how dangerous ice cream is.
Like most people, I enjoy a tasty scoop of ice cream, especially Oreo blizzards. But what few people realize is how dangerous a treat ice cream has become. First, there's the issue of obesity. Second, there are higher crime rates. Third, there's the loss of life due to a rise in the number of drowning deaths. And finally, as more ice cream is sold, there's an increase in forest fires. Given these indisputable facts, I need you to support my vision of an ice cream-free world. While banning ice cream trucks from entering your neighborhood may sound far-fetched, when it comes to problem solving, a common issue is misunderstanding the difference between correlation and causation. This misunderstanding can influence our decisions, sometimes with serious consequences that ripple throughout a community. Correlation is when two things are related, but one does not cause the other. Usually this means the two are in some way related to a third factor, but not always. If you have a big enough pile of data, you can find plenty of relationships that are purely coincidental, like the strong relationship between the sale of margarine and divorce rates in the state of Maine. With the sale of ice cream, the third factor is weather. When it is hot outside, people buy more ice cream. They are more likely to go for a swim, and there is a general increase in people out and about enjoying the weather, helping improve conditions for crime to take place, as well as the dry conditions associated with forest fires. A note of caution, there is a growing trend in our digital world called data dredging. This is using analytics to sift through mountains of data, hoping to find useful relationships. Instead of a problem in search of a solution, dredging data is a solution looking to find a problem. All of what I've just discussed about correlations does not mean that finding a correlation is without value. In fact, correlations are a vital part of helping us move to the next step, the discovery of causation. Unlike correlation, causation is when you can claim that one thing causes another thing to happen. In order to make this claim, you need to be able to demonstrate an actual cause and effect relationship, preferably a strong relationship. An example most of us are familiar with is the pharmaceutical industry. In order to make the claim that a particular drug causes a certain effect, such as lowering your cholesterol or growing hair, the FDA requires companies support those claims, putting the drug through a 4-phase, 12-step process that takes approximately 12 years. This process uses control groups and clinical trials to test the drug, making sure that X causes Y and that the drug is safe. The acceptable error rate can go as high as 5% for some drugs, meaning that the clinical trials prove that there's a 95% chance the drug does what it claims. Drugs with serious health implications, such as those used to treat a heart condition, are held to an even stricter standard, requiring proof up to 99% effectiveness. Back to ice cream. What about ice cream and obesity? While it may seem like common sense that it does cause obesity, the fact is that we don't yet know the true strength of the relationship. If we look at the sale of ice cream, there's actually an inverse relationship with weight. People gain weight in the winter when sales are low and lose weight in the warm summer months when more ice cream is being consumed. This might suggest ice cream is the new diet food. Luckily, you now know to be cautious of drawing conclusions of causation from correlation. Instead, recent research on the subject has been looking at different types of sugars used in making a wide range of sweet foods. What scientists have discovered is that the hypothalamus, which is an area of the brain that regulates the human appetite, reacts differently when we consume foods with fructose instead of glucose. This has researchers speculating that eating high fructose foods, such as ice cream, may result in people not feeling full, so they continue to eat. This theory proves difficult, however, when we start considering apples and other natural fruits also contain fructose, not just ice cream and chocolate cake. As you can see, causation is quite a bit different than correlation. Finding correlations is easy, proving causation is hard. No wonder it takes 12 years just to prove that a pill causes hair to grow. The bottom line, on the news, in boardrooms and coffee shops, everywhere you go, you will hear claims that X causes Y. From politics to the weather, from the stock market to personal relationships, it is human nature to try and explain things, to create stories that make sense. Just keep in mind, as you hear a claim of what causes what, that correlation is not causation.
So that's a cute little illustration of just how you can be led astray with correlational findings. Now, that's not to say that correlational research is useless. For example, we know mostly through correlational research how bad smoking is for people, right? It's mostly correlational research that has allowed us to know that smoking leads to lung cancer, right? Also some animal studies as well. But correlational research is not useless research. The point, though, is that we cannot make causal statements from correlational data, right? We can't say that some cause led to some effect when we were just looking at a correlation. The only way that you can really make causal statements research-wise is to do what's called an experiment, right? I'm just going to talk a little bit about the experimental method for a second. So with the experimental method, we're talking about the method in which you have two groups of participants, right? We're talking about people here probably because it's psychology. But you've got two groups of people, right? Two or more groups of people that receive a treatment. You've got a group that receives a treatment and the group that doesn't receive the treatment, right? The group that doesn't receive the treatment is the control group. And the group that receives the treatment is called the experimental group or the treatment group. And the treatment group receives what's called the dependent variable, right? So for example, in a controlled clinical trial, let's say you've got one group of people that's receiving the medication, one group that's receiving the sugar pill, the placebo, right? Also a great rock band, Placebo. You should look them up. British rock band, wonderful group, but not very family friendly. But anyway, in any case, you're giving the control group the placebo, you're giving the treatment group the real medication, and it's double blind. You don't know, who's getting what pill. You don't know what group you're in. You don't know whether you're getting the placebo or the treatment. And you compare the outcome between the two groups, right? So let's say we're testing some new antidepressant, right? So you've got one group that receives the antidepressant, one group that receives the sugar pill, and then you compare them later and you see, if depression rates are significantly lower in the group that got the treatment than the group that got the placebo, right? Right. So the video was not to make it made me want ice cream too. But I think it's a cute little illustration, though. It's a true fact that for example, rates of ice cream consumption are correlated with rates of drowning death, right? So as rates of drowning death go up, rates of ice cream consumption go up. Are we to conclude rather that consuming ice cream causes people to drown? No. We just know that people go swimming more often, during the hot weather, right? During the summer. So you have more drowning deaths when people are eating more ice cream, right? So that's a great illustration of the third variable problem, because your real causal variable there is the temperature outside, right? So within the experiment, though, you're isolating variables so that you don't have these extraneous variables that can come in and influence your result, right? So your independent variable is the treatment that you're giving the group, right? So the independent variable would be whether or not you've received the drug. And the dependent variable in this case, if it's an antidepressant, would be how depressed you are afterwards, right? So the dependent variable is the variable that you expect to be affected by your dependent variable, if that makes sense, all right? And again, this is all very, 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 I'm glad I could inspire some folks to love themselves. You're welcome, Brianna. I'm here to serve. I'm I'm glad that you are all enjoying your evening, and particularly with some ice cream. Good. I don't have any ice cream here, but I'm gonna have a beer when we're done here in a second. That's definitely gonna happen for me. I've got an IPA waiting for me in the fridge. It better be in the fridge. It better still be there. But in any case, you guys do your ice cream. I'm gonna have a beer in a second. But I want you guys to be familiar with these three basic types of research. This is the most basic level distinctions, right? I'm barely scratching the surface of the research methods that are talked about in the text. I'm not really going too deep into that. It's not going to be heavily covered on your first exam. I might have a few questions that ask you to be able to recognize the difference between descriptive, correlational, and experimental research. But again, just to recap, descriptive research just simply describes what's happening, right? It's just a description of events. You're not saying why it happened, but here's something that happened, right? And we've documented that this is going on. And I know that might sound like, well, why would you do that? Like, people already know things are happening. Well, actually, a lot of times people actually don't fully know what's happening, right? So to take, for example, an example of a school, right? Let's say you're a school principal. You have a vague idea that too many fights are happening in your school, right? But you don't have a precise count on it, right? So a descriptive study would be very useful for you in that situation, right? So a descriptive study can get you to a point where you know what the hell's going on, right? And you can't really do anything until you know what the hell's going on. So descriptive research can be very useful for just getting a picture of what's happening. However, correlational research looks at relationships between two variables, right? So you're looking at whether or not two variables are statistically related to each other. So with the example of ice cream consumption and drowning death rates. Rates of ice cream consumption are statistically correlated with rates of drowning death. Now, does that mean that eating ice cream causes drowning deaths? No, I just talked about that, right? Now, sometimes though, correlational findings do suggest something's going on. So for example, most of the research that we have on the negative effects of smoking are correlational studies, which have studied smokers over the years, right? You can't do an experiment on that on humans because it would be unethical to take someone who's not a smoker and get them to start smoking to see how it would affect their health. Right? You see how that would be ethically challenging, right? Now we can do it to animals, and we have, right? And we know through animal studies that smoking causes lung cancer, but we can't do it to a human being. The only research that we can do with human beings is correlational. So what that would mean is we can take a bunch of smokers and we can ask them to fill out a questionnaire about their health, and we can measure their health. And then we can take a bunch of non-smokers and do the same thing, and we can compare those results. But that's not a true experiment because we haven't administered any treatments, right? We haven't done control groups, we haven't done treatment groups. It's correlational, right? So with correlational data, you're looking at how two or more variables are statistically related to each other. Now, sometimes the correlational finding is highly meaningful, like in the case of the smoking research. In this case, yes, it's actually indicative of a causal relationship that exists, right? But you can't truly know if a causal relationship exists without an experiment. And so that's why the experiment is kind of the gold standard in social science research. But the problem is, like I said, it's not always ethically possible to do an experiment, and it's not always practically possible to do an experiment. So a good chunk of social science research relies upon descriptive and correlational research because experiments can be ethically challenging at times, not always, but they can be ethically challenging. They can be impractical, and they can be expensive and time consuming, right? So it's just easier to do correlational research and descriptive research for a lot of reasons. But really, if you truly want to know cause and effect, you have to do an experiment. It's 8:40, guys. So on next Thursday, we're going to talk about the biological side of development a bit more. So it's going to be heavy on biology next week. We're going to spend about an hour watching a documentary film on childbirth. Just as a very advanced trigger warning, you will be, if you choose to watch the film and not cover your eyes. There is a live childbirth that is shown in the film. It shows a vagina, and you're gonna have to deal with that. And I think at some point in the video, a penis might even show up, right? So, eek, right? But we're gonna watch the birds and the bees, and we're gonna learn all about that next week. We're gonna jump into the biology of reproduction, the birds and the bees, and all the ins and outs, pun intended. All right. So I'll see you guys next Thursday. And does anyone need to speak with me about anything before we call it a night here?
Yeah, you're not right.
I'm not right. Yeah, go ahead. I am not right. I'm the psychological deviant in many ways. You have no idea. Did someone else have a question?
I did.
Yeah.
I just trying to find a list of things to start studying for the chapter. What is it? Chapter quizzes.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah. So I will say about the chapter quizzes. They are open book. Okay. So so keep that in mind, right? You're not proctored while you're taking the quizzes. Now you are going to be proctored during the exams. The exams are not open book, but what I would recommend is using your textbook. You know, if you have a double screen display, I've got 2 monitors. I know some folks who have like 3 or 4, but if you've got more than 1 monitor, what I would recommend is having the textbook open on one monitor and having the quiz on the other. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to use your textbook on the quizzes. That's what they're for. They're to get you to open your textbook and read it. Yeah. So I would definitely utilize your textbook. I also have study guides posted for the exams. And also don't forget you get multiple attempts on those quizzes. You get 5 attempts. So
what would the study guides be?
So the study guides, I'll go ahead and pull up a share screen here. If there's anybody that needs to duck out, I get it, time's up. But so if you want to see where the study guides are, it's screen 1. I want screen 1. Okay, you should see my screen now, my other screen. So if you scroll down here in the modules, you'll see exam study guides. And these exams, by the way, if you try to open them, nothing's going to happen. They're just blank right now. So I don't even think they will open actually. They shouldn't be open. Do I have them open? I should not. They should not be open. I better make sure that they're not. Nobody be better taking exams at this point. They're not supposed to be open. I better fix. It's like they might be open. I need to fix that. But yeah, the exams are web proctored and they're not supposed to be open. But the quizzes are open book and the study guides are posted here. So they're just kind of basic documents, but it's just a list of concepts to be familiar with. So it'll load eventually. So there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else? No problem. Anybody else? Okay.
I was
like
just
I said, yeah, go ahead.
I was just asking that question because I've been writing down all these notes and I didn't know if it was like going to correlate to what was going to be in the quizzes or not. I was just
Yes, so the exams will be very similar to the quizzes, just more questions. But I reuse a lot of the quiz questions on the exams, and that's another reason why you want to use all your attempts on the quizzes, is because I reuse a lot of those questions. But yeah, I hope nobody's tried to open any of the exams. I didn't realize that they were open. So I'm glad I looked at that. But those will not be open here in a minute. And they won't be open until exam day. Any other items of discussion or any other points of debate? In case you're wondering, yes, I am aware. I do get the question quite frequently. I am asked if I am aware that I look like Seth Rogen. And yes, I am aware that I apparently look like Seth Rogen. For years, I've lost a little bit of weight in the last couple of years, so I don't know if it's still the case, but all the time, constantly, every semester, students are like, "Hey, you look like Seth Rogen," and I'm like, "Yeah, I know." So, yeah, I know. All right, so I will see you guys next Thursday. Live long and prosper, and I will be checking my email, constantly between now and then. So if you need to reach out to me, if we need to have a Zoom meeting about anything, I'm happy to do that for anybody who needs to. I'm on campus during the day, so you can find me in room 1408 on campus during the day in my office hours if I'm not in class teaching. Most of my classes are face-to-face lecture classes. This is kind of an unusual thing, right? Being at home in my music studio lecturing is kind of, it's a different flavor, right? It's a different energy, but it's kind of cool. So I'll see you guys next Thursday.